In this episode of trying all the ramen my mom brought from Korea, we have a variation of the ever popular Shin Ramen. At first I thought this was going to be a bibimbap, but nope, it's just a regular soup style ramen. So I boiled some water, added in the toppings, and noticed something interesting. This one came with an oil packet, and got me wondering what's different about, this version. It's called Shinramen Konmyeon, and after a quick Google search, I found out that Konmyeon means that the noodles weren't deep fried like usual, they're air dried instead. So I guess this is the quote unquote healthier version of Shinramen, and the oil packet is to bring back some of that richness. Tasting it, I was a little nervous because, sometimes when companies try to make a healthy version of something, it ends up pretty bad, but honestly, this one's really good, maybe even better. The noodles have a lighter texture, the broth tastes a little spicier than the regular version, and overall, I actually really like it. In this episode of trying all the ramen my mom brought from Korea, we have this one. And spoiler alert, it's the spiciest ramen I've ever had. Like, it absolutely laughs at Purduk's spice level. You can tell even from the packaging, it's all black with ominous red letters and a bunch of warning signs everywhere. If you read it, it roughly translates to, super strong spiciness. Opening the package, there were two things that immediately stood out. First, the toppings included whole dried peppers that looked insanely spicy. And second, the soup base was this thick, dark red paste. You could tell it was just going to be a pure capsaicin bomb. Now to the good news, flavor-wise, it's actually pretty good. It's not one of those foods that is, just spicy for the sake of being spicy. The broth has some deep, rich, spicy undertones, but honestly, it's still uncomfortably spicy. So if you're going to try it, maybe have some kimbap on the side like me to numb out the heat, or just skip it altogether. In this episode of trying all the ramen my mom brought from Korea, we've got another Jajangmyeon, a Korean Chinese black bean noodle dish, but this one has a green onion theme, which makes sense since scallion oil is key when making jajangmyeon from scratch. To really complete the meal, I'm having it with a fried egg and some dumplings, just like you would get at a Korean Chinese restaurant. Cooking it, it's pretty simple. You boil the noodles, drain them, and before adding them back into the pot, you dissolve the black bean powder in a little bit of water to make a smooth sauce. I actually like this method because it mixes more evenly, no salty clumps stuck to random noodles, and once it's all coated, you're good to go. Taste-wise, it's solid. The noodles are thinner than your typical jajangmyeon, which is kind of unusual, but they are more gelatinous, probably a different type of flour. Overall, a tasty and satisfying bowl. In this episode of trying all the ramen my mom brought from Korea, we have this one. Noguri is actually my mom's favorite instant ramen and is truly a classic before we had 100 ramen flavors. What is cool about this one is that you get a big piece of dried kelp. After all, it's, a spicy seafood broth ramen. Another thing that is interesting is that it's not a play on the Korean Chinese jjampong dish, which is pretty rare for a ramen that is seafood themed. In any case, cooking it is pretty simple. Since this is one of the older ramens that's been out for like forever, it doesn't have any fancy oil packs or complex cooking methods. You just dump everything into the pot and boil away. I guess the only thing you have to make sure of is cooking the noodles all the way through because the noodles are pretty thick, but yeah. Tasting it, it's pretty good. It's a very clean broth, so not much seafood flavor or spiciness, but just hints of everything. I guess you can best describe it as being a very inoffensive ramen, if that makes sense. In this episode of trying all the ramen my mom brought from Korea, we've got one from everyone's favorite croissant chef. Apparently there's some kind of scandal involving him, which I have no clue about, so I'm hoping it's nothing too horrendous or I might get cancelled for eating this ramen. Anyways, I reviewed his jajangmyeon before and that was actually pretty solid, so I have high hopes for this one too. I've also got some kimbap on the side, so fingers crossed this ends up pretty decent. Tasting it, yeah, it's pretty good, nothing mind-blowing or anything, but definitely not bad. The flavor itself kind of reminds me of Korean army stew, if you've ever had that. It's noticeably different from your typical Shin ramen, which is a nice change. A lot of ramens tend to be a blur together flavor-wise, but this one stands out a bit. I don't know if it's better, but it's definitely different, and that's not a bad thing. In this episode of trying all the ramen my mom brought from Korea, we've got this one. This time from a brand called Mishik. Now, this is the same company behind what I swear was the spiciest ramen I've ever tried in my life, so I approached this one with a bit of caution. Mishik is a relatively new player in the game, not one of those legacy brands, but I think their strategy is to make a more elevated premium style ramens. Like this one comes with a ramen paste packet for the flavoring, which is similar to what came with that spice bomb of ramen I had before. Because of that, mild PTSD, I went ahead and added an egg just in case, to hedge against any future regrets or times, spent suffering on the toilet. Luckily, this one's actually not spicy at all. It's your standard ramen, but I would say the flavor is deeper than Shin ramen. The noodles are solid, the broth also has some nice umami. Overall, I would recommend it, but I have not seen this outside of Korea, so good luck finding it. In this episode of trying all the ramen my mom brought from Korea, we've got what's probably the last Jajangmyeon in my stash. I think we've gone through a solid lineup, maybe 4 different kinds, and honestly, I'm surprised there are even that many out there. I didn't expect this many instant variations of the black bean noodle dish, but here we are. As usual, I cooked the noodles until they were nice and soft. Just a reminder for anyone making this, don't cook the oil packet. I always forget to fish it out before dumping everything into the boiling water, and it never ends well. Since I got a little lift session in earlier, I fried up 2 eggs to go with it. Gotta get that post-workout protein in. This jajangmyeon came with a powdered base instead of a paste, which means you really gotta mix it well, otherwise you'll just end up with random clumps of dry powder in your bite, and no one wants that. Tasting it, it's fine. If you see this on sale, I would say go for it. In this episode of trying all the ramen my mom brought from Korea, we're down to the final one in the stash. What I have in front of me is actually a pretty rare type of instant ramen. It's called Kal-guksu or knife cut noodles. They're called that because traditionally the dough is rolled out and sliced by hand with a knife, giving you these thick, rustic strands. The broth here is seafood based, so it has a clean, light flavor with a bit of black pepper that adds some subtle depth. And visually, you can definitely tell the noodles are different, whiter and flatter than your standard ramen. But tasting it, it's honestly just okay. Like the noodles are so thick that they don't really absorb the broth, so it ends up feeling like I'm eating 2 separate components, bland noodles with, decent soup. Even adding kimchi didn't bring it to life as much as I'd hoped. Still, at only 360 calories, it's a pretty light meal. And with that, we wrap up the series. But don't worry, next week we're diving into something new, so stay tuned if you've been enjoying these videos.